I want to share with you some experiences I've had lately that inspired today's talk. I started off by participating in our 24-hour prayer vigil here. I think it was around the beginning of December. And for any of you who have participated in that, you know what it's like to come into this sacred space. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's serene. You can feel the sacredness of it. We provide reading material. We usually provide music CDs, but that day the CD player wasn't working. So we worked with silence. Silence is wonderful. Silence lets you hear the inner voice of God speaking to you. I played with the gong, which I forgot to do today. You know what? There. We got the gong. I played with that. Molly had a beautiful brass bowl up here on the altar that was just beautiful. And so I made my own music. I put them both here on the piano and I played with them for a while. And then I sat and was doing the meditation, and I picked up a book that was here on the table, and it was the Tao Te Ching. I have never read the Tao Te Ching. I've never picked it up. I've never studied it. I've heard Andy talk about it quite a bit, so I thought, I should check this out. So I picked it up and I was kind of riffling through it, and one verse caught my attention, and it was verse 11. And I want to read that to you. There are several interpretations I'll talk about today, but this is the one that I read that day. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center whole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. This really struck me, this idea of emptiness as being useful, of being something. It just struck me as being sacred space. It is full of potentiality, and I'll get into more of that later. But as I was thinking about emptiness and this sacred space of emptiness over the next several weeks, I realized that there are a number of aspects to it. There are physical aspects, such as strength, safety, usefulness for storage. There are mental aspects of emptiness. For example, the way an artist use an empty space, an empty canvas. There are emotional aspects. Think of someone who says, I have an empty place in my heart, or I have an empty heart. There are really interesting spiritual aspects to this idea of emptiness. Let's talk about some of the spiritual or the physical ones first, because these are things that we see every day. We use them, we see them. I don't think we pay attention to them. An empty table, like I talked about the altar and the meditation this morning. It begs to be filled with gifts for sharing. It begs to be useful. We put things on a table. I mean, my kitchen table at home has got the salt, the pepper, usually a scattering of paper, because we have a problem with paper in our house. It replicates itself at night. Turns, 10 sheets turn into 20 by breakfast. There's a sugar bowl there. There's a couple of placemats, and, sometimes leftover salad dressing from yesterday. It's a useful, empty space. An empty room provides living space, shelter, storage. Now here's an interesting thing about a room. An empty room has lots of room in it for things, but if you don't put an empty space for a window in, you get no light or ventilation. If you don't put an empty space in the wall for a door, you can't get in and out of it. And look how important those empty spaces are to us. We decorate them. We do treatments for windows. We decorate the outer areas of doors. We put extra windows in them. These are important empty places in our life that we use all the time. We decorate our rooms. Have you ever been to a home show where you've got all these little booths that are identical, empty little booths? Put a bunch of decorators in there, and not one of them is the same, because we value that empty space. It is a creation of our expression. An empty chair. How many times have you been really tired and you see an empty chair and it's like a big sigh of relief? That empty chair is inviting you to sit, to rest. One of the physical aspects of emptiness is strength. It's a well-known fact that if you have a hollow tube and a solid rod of the same size, the hollow tube is stronger. The physics of it, the empty space inside, makes it stronger. They use hollow tubes for structures and things to give it more strength. Buoyancy. It would be hard to have a boat without a hollow space in the middle. It just sinks like a rock. Now, Bill tells me there are other physical aspects to a boat, but yeah, that's beside the point. I let him have his point. I said, this is my talk. No. Here's a little one. Empty bubbles in your bread allow the bread to rise. It makes it fluffy, but it's the empty spaces that make it do that. So we see these empty spaces in our physical world all the time. We use them. They're there for us. We don't pass them up because they're empty. No, we fill them. We use them. They are symbols of pure potentiality for us. Some of the mental aspects of emptiness are, let's talk about artistic functions. If you've ever seen an empty canvas, just a plain blank canvas, I don't know if everybody does this, but to me it begs me to pick up a paintbrush or a pencil or a pen. A blank piece of paper for a writer is a tool. It is the space for which they create, through which they create. They have a mental equivalent in their head of what should be on the paper, what should be on the canvas. A sculptor sees a piece of rock or a piece of wood or stone. That's their canvas. It looks like just a lump to a lot of us, just a nice piece of wood or just a rock. The artist sees beneath the empty facade to the picture or to the being that is inside that, to the shape that they are called on to bring out of that. An instrument like a piano, it's empty right now. There's nobody sitting, there's no music coming out of it, but its potential for beautiful music calls to a musician who plays that. Space to oneself. This is one of the mental aspects of emptiness that some people are afraid of, other people welcome. I grew up in a family of 7 children and 2 adults in a very small house. Trust me, there was no space to oneself. You were lucky if you got the bathroom for a couple of minutes by yourself. I didn't realize until I grew up and moved out and had my own space how valuable empty space for myself was. Peace and quiet? Oh my God, I don't think I even knew what that was when I was growing up. There was a full house of confusion, noise, happy chatter, laughter, but it was never quiet. So to me, these are emotional aspects of emptiness that are very important. I've learned to appreciate peace and quiet. It also allows us time to separate ourselves from the busyness of life around us, the work space, the traffic space, the shopping space, our own little quiet space that is empty of noise and confusion brings us back to ourself. An emptiness of artificial light. This is physical, but it's also emotional to me. It's also mental. In a place like paradise, you can actually do this, where you can find pockets of space that have no artificial light around, and it seems really dark until you start seeing the stars. This is the potential of this kind of emptiness. I go out sometimes at night in my backyard and sit on the glider and lean my head back just to see the stars. And in that particular place, there are no street lights, there's no traffic lights, nothing that interferes with that. And the longer I sit there staring at the stars, the more stars appear. It's just an incredible experience that you can't have in a city anymore. I know, because I've lived in them. I forgot what stars looked like. Now this one, I hesitated to put this in here because it sounds negative, but it really isn't. An empty wallet or an empty checkbook. This is not a sign of lack or need. What that is a gentle reminder to us to be aware of the abundance in our lives and to be grateful for it. And as we all know this, as we are more aware of the abundance, more aware of our gifts, and the more we express our gratitude for that, the more we get. So an empty wallet is a wake-up call for us. It's like, okay, what have I been thinking? What have I got to change in my thinking to fill the wallet? The emotional aspects of emptiness are a little more ambiguous, but they're very important. Have you ever heard someone talk about having an empty heart? Usually it's because they've lost someone, ended a relationship, someone moved away, and someone says, I have a hole in my heart. I have an empty heart. This is not a lack of love. This is a lack of focus for a love that's there. When you have, all of us have love to give, every single one of us. There is not one person in this room or in this world who does not have love to give. But when you have no one to focus that love on, no place to put it, it feels like you have an empty place. I think that if we feel like we have an empty place in our hearts, we need to look at that and say, okay, where can I focus my love? Where can I focus my caring and sharing? I'm not talking about just a romantic relationship. I'm talking about caring and sharing for children, for pets, for neighbors, people in need. There are many, many places that we can focus our love and fill that empty hole in our hearts. Fulfillment is a word we use when we fill empty places in our lives. Sometimes we just go along and we're living and we feel like there's an empty spot. And it might not be an empty heart necessarily, but an empty spot. Some place that needs filling. And when we find either an activity or a belief system or something that fills those spots, we call it fulfillment. So that's going to bring me into the spiritual aspects of this. The spiritual aspects of emptiness take quiet and solitude to be recognized. We're so inundated with noise, with people, with work, with business, everything that's going on around us, that many times we don't take the time or feel that we need to take the time to recognize this quiet, this part of us that we need to recognize our spiritual aspects. We don't always stop and notice what is missing and leading us to need something more. But when there is a hole inside of us, it starts eating at us. And it causes us to start seeking, whether we're aware of it or not. I know that this is true for me. I went for about 15 years with no spiritual tradition at all because I had found a huge hole in myself with the spiritual tradition I was raised with. Serious lack of understanding, lack of empathy, lack of belief, in what was being taught to me and presented to me as the truth left me with this huge hollow feeling, and I walked away from it. But I lived with that feeling of emptiness for about 15 years and just never really thought that I would find something to fill it because I had rejected all of that. I had turned myself away from any kind of spiritual tradition because I kind of lumped them all together, didn't realize there were other traditions out there. And I ran into completely, well, I'll say by accident, but I know it was a thump on the head from God. You know, you've all had that, right? Boom. Oh, hello. Pay attention. I ran into something on the internet about a spiritual tradition that I was able to go, oh my gosh, I can believe in this. This is something interesting. This is completely different from what I rejected all those years ago. And I delved into it, and it was kind of a precursor to this tradition for me. I was involved in it for about 6 or 7 years, and it brought me a lot of fulfillment, filling up some of the empty places. It still left me with a lot of questions, though. But it started me seeking when I wasn't even aware that I was seeking. When we are in a spiritual tradition that doesn't fit, we're like a round peg in a square hole. And you know how that is. It not only doesn't fit very well, but it leaves empty spaces in the corners. So you recognize the empty spaces. You feel the empty spaces. When we start noticing the holes and start looking for answers, we start asking questions. What gives me meaning? What makes sense to me? Why am I here? What am I here to do? Where do I belong? These are questions every single person asks themselves at some time in their life. And when you are seeking spiritually to fill your empty holes, your empty spaces, those are the questions that come up. Julie very kindly lent me her book from Wayne Dyer. He wrote a book called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, Living the Wisdom of the Tao. The interpretation of this verse that he used in his book is this: 30 spokes converge upon a single hub. It is on the hole in the middle that the use of the cart hinges. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Carve fine doors and windows, but the room is useful in its emptiness. The usefulness of what is depends on what is not. He points out that you can lay all the materials for a room, wood, plaster, nails, drywall, all of that. You can lay it all out. It has no usefulness laying in a pile. It is not until you shape it and put it into the shape of the room and create that empty space within that it is useful. He points out that our bodies are the same thing. We are made up of blood and bone and muscle and skin that holds it all together. But if you laid it all out and it was still functioning, it would not be you. It would be body parts. The invisible part, the non-being part of it, is the real you. This is what he got out of this verse of the Tao. A pile of clay, it's just a pile of clay. Until you shape it into a vessel with an empty space inside, it has no use. So he calls that space within us non-being. I'm not real comfortable with that thought. It kind of sounds like non-existence. But it is the empty space within us. It is the pure potentiality that we are created with. So, what is the sacred space of emptiness? It is the pause in forward movement. It is the moment when we stop and say, where am I going? What am I doing? What am I looking for? It's a placeholder for something necessary or desired. It is pure potentiality. That's what the sacred space of emptiness is. So, what do we do with this? What do we do with it? We embrace it. We use it. It is no good to us or to anyone else if we just leave it alone. An empty room sitting empty is no good. It doesn't attract us. It doesn't do anything for us. So we use it. We fill it. We decorate it. We make it our own. The empty spaces, the empty quiet that we can indulge in for meditation, we embrace that. We allow ourselves to live in that empty space. It is a sacred empty space because we can use it. It allows us to listen to the small, still voice inside. It allows us to be ourselves, to find ourselves. The empty space of an artist's canvas doesn't do anyone any good until the artist uses it. Thank you.